Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking into something that seems like a real paradox, doesn't it? We're talking about how a community deeply committed to changing the world, fighting discrimination, boosting social justice, building strong communities, also holds this incredibly strict line on political neutrality. Absolutely not involved. Okay, let's unpack this. We've got some fascinating source material here, letters, specific guidance that really maps out this tightrope walk between constructive social action and steering clear of partisan politics. For you, the listener, getting a grip on this boundary is, I think, pretty key to understanding their whole approach to change.
It absolutely is. And the sources we're drawing on, mainly guidance from Shoghi Effendi and later the Universal House of Justice, that's the global governing body, they frame it very intentionally. They argue that non-involvement and social action aren't opposites at all. No, they're supposed to work together, like two sides of the same coin, part of one single strategy.
Okay, so what's the big idea behind that strategy?
The main goal is fostering unity over partisanship. The belief is that real, lasting change comes from tackling the root causes of society's problems, not getting endlessly bogged down in the sort of political fights over symptoms. So our mission today really is to trace out those lines. What exactly are the do's and don'ts? What's the thinking behind it? And where do believers get the green light to actively work for, a better world?
Right. Let's dive straight into the don'ts then, because the lines drawn here feel incredibly strict, especially compared to, a lot of modern activism.
Yeah.
What does non-involvement actually forbid? It's got to be more than just not, say, running for office.
Oh, much more. The core guidance is really clear. Believers have to refrain from associating themselves, and this is key, whether by word or by deed, with the political pursuits of their respective nations. So that means keeping a distance from the schemes and programs of parties and factions and, the specific policies of governments, too.
Wow. That sounds like it requires a lot of self-restraint, maybe even self-silencing, especially in places where political opinions and affiliations are almost expected. How do you even discuss current events if you can't align with parties?
Well, you maintain strict neutrality. That's the mandate. When political controversies flare up, the guidance says believers should assign no blame, take no side, further no design, and it goes on, and identify themselves with no system prejudicial to the best interests of their global community. It actually calls on them to actively avoid the entanglements and bickerings inseparable from the pursuits of the politician.
I like that phrase, entanglements and bickerings.
Yeah.
It really cuts to the chase, doesn't it? It paints partisan politics as inherently, messy and divisive. But practically, does this mean no political commentary at all? Like, ever?
It primarily governs public association and public criticism or endorsement. The constraints are quite specific. It's seen as inappropriate to, say, vilify specific individuals or organizations or governments, no launching attacks, and there's even a caution against referring to political figures publicly. It doesn't matter if it's criticism or support.
Why so strict on even mentioning figures?
The thinking is pretty straightforward. The moment you endorse or heavily criticize a specific political figure or party, you risk compromising the community's ability to rise above all particularism and partisanship. It undermines that position of being a unifying force.
Okay, that makes sense for maintaining unity, at least externally. But that brings us to another really big piece, obedience to government. The sources say this is mandatory, no matter what kind of government it is. Why is that so absolute? And how does a community focused on social justice square that?
Yeah, this is where we hit that point you mentioned earlier, the one that can seem, pretty surprising, even counterintuitive. The sources are unambiguous. Even civil disobedience, whatever merit it appears to have had in particular political settings, is just not acceptable for Bahá'ís.
Wait a minute. But think about history, Gandhi, Dr. King. Civil disobedience was often seen as vital, maybe the only way to push for moral change when the system was unjust. How does the source material justify rejecting it, especially given the commitment to justice? Is it saying order comes before fixing injustice right now?
It's framed differently. The sources argue the priority has to be building a stable, unified foundation for lasting change, not just short-term wins that might cause division. This principle of obedience, it's directly linked to keeping the Bahá'í community itself united. Shoghi Effendi explained it by saying, look, individuals shouldn't get caught up in constantly judging their government as just or unjust, because if they did,
everyone would have a different opinion.
Exactly. He warned that each believer would be sure to hold a different viewpoint, and within our own Bahá'í fold, a hotbed of dissension would spring up and destroy our unity.
So the community's unity is seen as this vital asset, maybe the very engine for long-term change. And it's too important to risk by getting entangled in potentially divisive political judgments or actions. It's like a protective measure for the community itself.
Precisely. The integrity and cohesion of the community are paramount. But what's fascinating here is the clarification that comes with it. This obedience doesn't mean you have to agree with or endorse the government's political program. You obey the law, yes, for the sake of order and community unity, but you don't have to identify the faith's teachings with those policies.
So you can separate the act of obedience from any kind of endorsement.
Right. And that separation is crucial because it's meant to prevent what the sources call a conflict within the conscience of the believer. You hold on to your moral principles, your commitment to social change, but you do it in a way that protects that internal unity needed to actually achieve it.
That distinction, obeying the law without necessarily endorsing the policy, that really helps clarify the neutrality piece.
Okay, so if they're not engaging in political opposition, not even civil disobedience, how are they supposed to bring about change? Where's the green light to act?
Right. This is the other very active side of the equation. Non-involvement in partisan politics is absolutely not meant to be a barrier to social change. Quite the opposite. The community is encouraged, even expected, to put forward effective remedies for and address the root causes of the ills afflicting society.
Okay, so where's the room to maneuver? What differentiates the forbidden political stuff from the encouraged social action? Where's that line drawn? Well, the latitude for constructive social action is actually pretty broad, as long as it stays nonpartisan. Shoghi Effendi, for example, explicitly warned believers against going to the other extreme of never taking part with other progressive groups in conferences or committees designed to promote some activity in entire accord with our teachings. So this opens the door for believers, usually acting as individuals, to get involved in movements working towards widely accepted moral goals. The sources give concrete examples.
Like what?
Things like the advancement of women, promoting social justice, protecting the environment, working to eliminate discrimination in all its forms, safeguarding human rights, you see. These tackle fundamental issues, those root causes, but they aren't inherently tied to one political party's platform or agenda.
That sounds good in theory, but I can imagine it gets tricky in practice. I mean, take protesting racial prejudice that often spills over into demands for specific policy changes, doesn't it?
That's a great point, and actually, there's a perfect anecdote in the guidance that illustrates this boundary. The Guardian, Shoghi Effendi, through his secretary, responded to a question about Bahá'í students participating in a campus protest about racial prejudice.
And what was the response?
He indicated there was no objection to them taking part, and the reason given was key, because there was nothing political about it. It was understood as a moral stand on a fundamental principle, racial unity, not an endorsement of a candidate or a specific partisan bill.
That's a really helpful distinction. So action is needed when core principles like racial unity are violated, but the way you act have to stay non-political. Focused on the principle, maybe on constructive dialogue rather than political fighting.
Exactly. It's about the how. And for you, the listener, if you're ever wondering about a specific situation, the guidance is clear. If there's any doubt whether an event or activity might cross that line into partisan politics, believers are advised to seek guidance from their National Spiritual Assembly. That's the elected national governing body.
So there's a consultative check in place.
Yes, that mechanism helps ensure the community consistently upholds that principle of nonpartisanship.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly beyond just the rules to the deeper why. Why avoid partisanship? The sources even call political goals a chimera sometimes. What's the perceived danger in political conflict, even if it's aimed at achieving justice? Why is it seen as, well, self-defeating?
The argument presented in the sources is that partisanship, by its very nature, sows seeds of discontent. It inherently fails to build the broad consensus needed for truly lasting change. The political process, as it often functions, is adversarial. And this leads, the source suggests, to a kind of damaging cycle where conflict and contention ultimately yield more conflict and contention. It doesn't actually resolve the root issues.
You can definitely see echoes of that in today's world, right? Especially in places like the U.S., which the sources actually mentioned specifically as a backdrop for some of this guidance. The polarization seems intense.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the guidance points to that context of increasing fragmentation, this hardening of viewpoints, a rise in incivility, and crucially, an unwillingness to compromise or even entertain differing perspectives. It notes how even vital matters of moral principle get boiled down into these intractable liberal or conservative viewpoints, forcing people into camps.
Yeah, and in that kind of environment, just taking a side means you've potentially lost the ability to connect with everyone, to build that wider unity needed for real change. The system itself forces division.
That's the core insight, I think. The sources argue that truly getting rid of deep social problems requires unity of thought as well as action, and that unity, they believe, is best achieved through consultative processes, not adversarial ones. Justice is absolutely essential, yes, but unity forged through consultation is seen as the power needed for positive social change. So believers are urged to resist getting drawn into what the sources call the vain imaginings of purely political solutions and focus instead on building unity and addressing root causes.
Vain imaginings. That's a strong phrase. It really suggests a fundamental skepticism about whether the current political system, often built on conflict, can ever deliver genuine, lasting unity. Is that fair to say?
I think that captures the essence of it, yes. It's skepticism about the process of adversarial politics as the ultimate path to unity and justice. And this leads to, well, 3 overlapping areas of action for believers today.
Okay, what are those?
So first, there are the community building efforts happening at the local level in what are often called clusters. These focus a lot on education, spiritual development, empowering grassroots action. Second, specific projects and activities for social action, like the examples we mentioned, advancing women, environmental protection, and so on. And third, engaging in the discourses of society. This means contributing constructive perspectives in various spaces, neighborhoods, professional associations, academic circles, but again, doing so in a nonpartisan, unifying way.
It really does sound like a single integrated strategy then. The political neutrality isn't separate from the social action. It actually protects the space for the social action to be more effective and unifying.
Exactly. And the sources explicitly warn against creating dichotomies where none exist, like pitting non-involvement against social action. The idea is to see the teachings as one great whole with many facets. It's not an either path.
Which brings us full circle, really. The strategy seems clear. Maintain political neutrality to protect community cohesion. Then use that cohesion to fuel constructive social action grounded in justice, consultation, and the pursuit of unity.
Precisely. And maybe this leaves us with a final thought, something provocative perhaps. The sources point out that demonstrations and protest, while they have their place, are not the only or even the most effective means for change. They suggest the ultimate role, or at least a crucial part of it, is helping fellow citizens frame concerns in a way that rises above fissures above those divisions.
So the question for you, the listener, whatever your own background or beliefs might be, is perhaps this. If the aim is real, lasting transformation, how can we in our own lives, our workplaces, our communities, focus more on fostering those kinds of consultative spaces, spaces that try to transcend the usual divisive approaches without getting sucked into the vain imaginings of partisan fighting? That seems to be the challenge posed here for building genuine unity and achieving long-term change.